Hi, this is Stuart Weems and welcome to the Investopoly podcast. My goal is to give you simple, easy to understand strategies, insights and tips to help you master the game of building wealth. And in this episode, I'd like to talk about asset protection because I think it's one of those things that investors really sort of think about, and the ones that do think about it, in my experience, tend to overthink it and therefore either take very expensive advice and overcomplicate their situation. In fact, over the last few weeks, I've met a couple of people that have paid a lot of money to either lawyers and accountants that have then set up this really convoluted structure to protect their assets, where in fact I think their asset protection risk is relatively low. Meanwhile, they've spent $5,000 or more in terms of fees in order to do that. So my first tip with respect to asset protection is when getting advice, get it from someone that doesn't have a vested interest in the advice outcome. So typically that's an independent financial planner, because independent financial planners don't typically set up structures like trusts and so forth, and they don't obviously offer legal services. So they don't have any vested interest whether you should set up lots of different structures and so forth, and therefore they're independent, and they can help you sort of understand what are your asset protection risks, and how important is it to do certain things, or how much of a step do you take to really protect your assets. So in this podcast, what I'd like to do is outline the four typical asset protection risks, and then what to do to mitigate them. Okay, so asset protection risk number one is if you're self-employed. If you're self-employed, you're sometimes going to be exposed to risks that are different than what employees are exposed to naturally. So the first thing that you need to think about is, what if you get sued? There's two things that you need to do about that. Firstly, you need to have a business structure that's limited liability. So that typically that's a company, and you'd then typically have the shares in that company owned by a discretionary family trust. For example, then you might have a further company underneath that. But essentially what you want to do is, if you get sued, then the assets of the business are only at risk, not your personal assets. The second thing you need to do is make sure that you've got the right insurances in place, business insurances in place. And that could be public liability, product liability, warranty insurance, business interruption, work cover insurance, professional indemnity, public liability, all those sorts of things. Now, you don't necessarily need all of them, but speaking to a good business broker will help you understand what are the key insurances that you need. So that's the first step, right structure, right insurances. The second step is to understand what are the two key risks that directors of a business can be held personally liable for. And typically, there's only two. The first one is trading while insolvent. So that is, if you're deemed insolvent and you keep trading, a director can be held personally liable for that. And then not maintaining a safe workplace. So again, if you're in a business that has a riskier workplace, maybe manufacturing, construction, those sorts of things, you really want to make sure that your business is doing and taking all the necessary steps to protect yourself from those risks. But apart from that, have the right structure insurance, your asset protection risks are relatively low. The second asset protection risk category is occupational risk. So obviously some occupations carry higher risks than others. Obstetrics is a good example of that, because obviously whilst practicing obstetrics, if you make a mistake or an error, it could cost or result in a lost life. So it's pretty significant, as opposed to a mistake as a checkout person at a supermarket. Those jobs still exist. You make a mistake, it's not such a great deal. When looking at riskier occupations, we need to understand that professional indemnity insurance, particularly in Australia, has very deep cover. And there's restrictions in terms of legal liability in relation to professional matters as well. So therefore, you don't get the same sort of litigious approach that you would in other countries like the US in respect to these matters, and the experience of personal loss as a result of an action. So personal loss outside of the professional indemnity insurer paying for any losses is very, very limited. There's very few cases, and the amounts of loss are very small. It's actually probably only really relevant where For example, a insurer wants to settle a case, but you don't. They want to settle the case to make it go away, but from a professional, reputational perspective, you don't want to settle it, and maybe then you take on the legal costs. In that situation, potentially, you're personally liable for that. But that's far-reaching. So the only action, or the main action, that professional indemnity insurance won't cover is if you're criminally negligent. Well, most of us go to work and we do a good professional job, so I don't think we need to worry about criminal negligence. The fourth asset protection risk is being a property investor, and so that would occur when a tenant or their guests suffer an injury whilst attending one of your properties. And also then think about the types of properties that you're investing in as well, very high or unsafe balconies for children, properties with pools. I'd never buy an investment property with a pool. I think these exhibit higher risk, but landlord insurance will help you protect against that. It provides public liability cover, damage caused by tenants, loss of rent, legal fees, and so on. So having good quality landlord insurance is a good way to mitigate that risk. And then the last risk is really statistically probably your highest or most concerning risk. And unfortunately, there's probably not much you can do about it, and that is relationship breakdowns. And so in Australia, about 1/3 of marriages end in divorce. So again, statistically, for a lot of my clients, it's going to be a significant risk. So whether you're married or in a de facto relationship depends on the circumstances, particularly obviously from a de facto definition perspective. But things that they're going to consider, or the court will consider, is really the length of the relationship, whether you're cohabitating, living together, the sharing of household chores, contributions to the household, amalgamation of finances, any existence of children, common friends, sharing pastimes, all those sorts of things. So really whether you're living a together life or two separate lives. So you need to be very careful about that fact that you might actually find yourself in a de facto relationship before you expect that to happen. So what can you do to mitigate that risk? Well, a binding financial agreement is a good place to start. And that's really just an agreement that if the relationship was to dissolve in the future, what financial entitlements will we have? And working these things out, or having a clear expectation at the beginning of a relationship, is a great way to make, in the event, unlikely or unfortunate event that your relationship doesn't prosper and continue, then it makes it easier in terms of unwinding that. In the show notes, I've got a link to a program on SBS called Insight. They aired an episode recently about binding financial agreements, and they interviewed lots of lawyers and couples that have and not had, decide to have them and not have them, and they discussed a lot of the legal and practical issues with them. So really interesting. I've got that link in the show notes. So that's all you can really do, I guess, to protect your assets. Then in the event of a relationship breakdown, I guess the only other thing that you can do is make an agreement at the outset that if we were to go through that you commit to a different process of resolving a relationship breakdown dispute. And that could be something like collaborative law. So, the legal system was designed about 1,000 years ago, and it was designed mainly to resolve commercial disputes. And the legal system hasn't really changed a lot over that period of time. So it's not really designed to deal with family law matters or family matters. And it actually sometimes exacerbates a problem. It creates arguments, extends arguments, and so forth, and aggravates the two individuals involved. And so collaborative law is something that's becoming more popular, and you can get legal practitioners that practice in collaborative law. And essentially the aim is to mediate a solution, sitting around everyone's sitting around a table and just mediate and nut out a solution that everyone's happy with, as opposed to going to court, swapping documents, communicating by letter, those sorts of things. They typically don't. They tend to aggravate the situation rather than break it down. So one thing that you could possibly do at the beginning of a relationship is to say, look, if it doesn't work out, let's both agree to enter into a collaborative law solution, and maybe that might help you in the future. So asset protection's obviously a really important asset aspect to consider. And really there's, a full financial plan or holistic financial plan should consider lots of things, including, and the main ones are really cash flow, investment strategy, asset selection, asset protection, risk management, insurances, and then wills and estate planning. So it doesn't necessarily mean you need very comprehensive solutions in all those aspects, but what you need to do is tick that box. You need to think about those sorts of things. So I think talking about asset protection demonstrates really the benefit of receiving holistic advice to make sure that, that there's nothing missed. And I would say most people don't have very high asset protection risks, but there are a couple of small key things that they need to do to mitigate some of those risks. And the podcast today has sort of touched on them. So as always, there's more information in the show notes and a link to the blog on our website. So certainly have a look at that. And if you need any help, you know where we are. And the final thing I'll say is, again, if you're enjoying these podcasts, please do jump on iTunes and rate it. It certainly helps us with our ranking and helps people work out if it's going to be good for them as well. So the more people that listen in, the merrier we are. Okay, until next week, bye for now.